Good afternoon. I'm Gary Stark, President and CEO of the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching. Thank you for being here today to join us as we release our new publication, More Than Measurement. I hope everyone has a copy. If not, we can get you one. This publication will provide an in-depth look at TAP's approach to teacher evaluation. This paper provides 10 lessons learned about how to build better teacher evaluation systems based on NIET's decade-long experience implementing the TAP system in multiple states and schools around the country. The paper delves into nuances of policy design on teacher evaluation, exploring how to leverage multiple measures, ensure reliable and valid measurement of teacher performance, training and certifying your evaluators, selecting the appropriate rubric, integrating evaluation with coaching and professional development so that every teacher, regardless of current performance, has a pathway to improvement. In addition to Carmel Martin from the U.S. Department of Education, we're joined by 2 trained and certified TAP evaluators, as well as a state director for the state of South Carolina, who will tell us about the challenges of implementing a teacher evaluation change and effort within the state. Let me first introduce our speaker, Carmel Martin, Assistant Secretary for Planning, Evaluation, Policy Development at the U.S. Department of Education. Carmel has been a key player on education issues for many years. She fully appreciates that teachers are the most important school-based factor impacting student achievement, and she has worked to promote teacher and principal effectiveness in her many different roles, including the U.S. Senate. Carmel is leading the efforts to develop and move the administration's recommendations on ESEA reauthorization and to make principals and teachers central to this debate. Please help me welcome Carmel Martin.
Thank you, Gary. I just want to start by thanking Gary and Kristan and NIET for all of their tremendous leadership on education issues, and in particular the issues around teacher and leader development. This is obviously a core to the President and the Secretary's agenda, and we are just really grateful for all of the work they've done in the field, but also in terms of all the work within the policymaking setting to help us make better decisions as we move forward. I want to thank Kristan and Craig for a terrific report. It is definitely something that will be a must-read at the Department of Education, and want to thank the other panelists for everything they do every day to help kids be more successful on a daily basis. Kristan knows I've been a big fan of TAP for many years and feel like it is the program has been a leader, really pushed the sector on how to do evaluation systems more effectively. But more importantly, they've also been a leader in terms of using evaluations to support teachers and transform schools. They don't just look at it from the perspective of how it impacts teachers, but how it impacts teaching and students and schools, which is very aligned with how we think about it at the Department of Education, and I know how the Secretary thinks about it as well, and I know he's a big fan of the program. Across our agenda, we're encouraging states to take a comprehensive look at and approach to how they develop and support their teachers and leaders in schools. And that starts with preparation, ensuring that programs are preparing students for the classroom they'll work in, looking at how their graduates perform in the classroom, and tailoring their program based on that data. And I know that our state director here with us today has been a leader on this issue in South Carolina, and that's definitely a model that we've been looking at and looking at ways that we could help promote across the country. We're also focused on what happens in schools and making sure teachers are getting the feedback, support, and recognition that they deserve. Evaluation systems that meaningfully identify teacher strengths and needs, looking at both student growth data and measures of teaching practice like observations. School districts also, we've been really encouraging them to use this information to inform decisions around compensation, career advancement, but just as importantly, using the information to create more collaborative, supportive school environments that offer targeted professional development, mentoring, and a school culture focused on results. And we've seen phenomenal progress on each of these areas through our work on Race to the Top and the Teacher Incentive Fund, and it's definitely something we want to push forward on through the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Doing this right requires evaluations that are fair and rigorous and provide meaningful feedback, and it requires working with and listening to teachers. Through the proposals we've laid out in our blueprint for the reauthorization, we're hoping to build on and extend this progress to all 50 states. We know that the work isn't simple, but strong examples are emerging across the country. And TAP certainly offers continuing evidence that this kind of work can be done at scale with its work in 250 schools in 15 states. In the last year, we've seen increasing evidence that TAP is getting strong results, looking at school-level results, the Stanford Institute for Economic Research study, TAP's own data showing their success, and we continue to hear from teachers and leaders at these schools, people like Monica and Dedra, who you'll be hearing from today, about how positive an effect TAP has had on their schools. The Secretary often talks about his experience talking to teachers about these things and feels like the model is really responsive to what they are looking for. But we know TAP didn't get there overnight, and this report is an important contribution because it shows how TAP has overcome many of the potential challenges in building these systems. I've participated in several calls and meetings that the Secretary has had with our TIF grantees and our Race to the Top grantees, and something they have asked us for when we say, how can we help you move forward with your plans, to move forward with your grant applications, they say repeatedly, well, we need help in understanding how to do these things well. And teacher evaluation systems is one of the examples that they give of things that they would like to know what other people are doing and how they have overcome obstacles they face in putting together these systems. So we've been trying to do that, and reports like this will certainly help us in our effort to be responsive to state and local needs around this. I know that Kristan's going to go through the lessons of the report, so I don't want to preempt her presentation, but just wanted to highlight a few areas that I thought were particularly meaningful for our work from a federal policy perspective. And the first is the lesson around making sure that measures in the teacher evaluation system are rigorous and meaningful. In TAP's model, it includes student growth, but also looks at multiple observations against skills, knowledge, and responsibilities. And I think the report really brings home the importance of not just looking at test score data, but looking at other measures as well, which has been a core piece of our agenda in the teacher evaluation space. I think the thing that we need to be careful about doing, and have tried to be careful about doing, is that we can't dictate from the federal level exactly which measures are to be used or what percentage weight to give them. But I think that things like this report show that there's value in trying these things out and adjusting where you need to make adjustments, but also the importance of validating the measures that you're using so they have credibility with teachers and with other professionals in the school. So I think that's a really important lesson. The second is something I've mentioned briefly already, but something that we think is really important, something that I've been passionate about for a long time, which is that the evaluation system should be used in order to support teachers, not just to identify bad teachers, but really used to help support them. And I think the report talks about the importance of things like pre- and post-observation conferences and follow-up support, making sure that the professional development system in the school is informed by the evaluation system. And I think that's really important. We've tried in moving forward with the Teacher Incentive Fund to really expand that program so it gets at this concept that at the heart of the program from a statutory standpoint, but also from the Secretary's perspective, is this idea of connecting compensation, building performance-based compensation systems. But something that we've really tried to do in reshaping the program is make sure it's not just about compensation systems. It's also about using data to inform professional development, to identify high-performing teachers so they can serve as master teachers and help support the other teachers in the school. So that's something that we've really tried to push forward on in our policies, and we'll continue to do so. And then the second area I thought was really important is the idea of quality control in TA, that we can't just put a system like this in place and expect it to be successful, that it requires training, not just for teachers, but leaders and evaluators, and monitoring how folks who are doing observation are doing and making sure they're doing a good job, providing external supports to schools as they implement these kinds of systems. And that's definitely a lesson that we're going to carry towards our work with respect to Race to the Top states and TIF grantees. And then finally, I think the other lesson learned that's really important for us is the concept that if you're going to put in place a system like this, that you really need to work with teachers. It's not something that can be imposed on them, and I think that's something the Secretary felt like he carried forth as a superintendent and believes in really strongly. And I think an important part of that is seeing teacher leaders as evaluators because they are closer to teaching and each teacher's context. And also doing that creates more opportunities for follow-up coaching. And then the other thing that's important in this space, which the report brings forth, is making sure that teachers understand how the system works, that they feel like it's a valid way of judging their performance. So I think that's another really important point that the report brings forth. So those are the things that we thought had the most impact for us, but the entire report is very valuable, and we're definitely going to use it as we move forward with our work. So I want to thank you again for it, and turn it over to Kristan, who's been had a huge impact inside the Beltway in terms of really teaching people like me how these things work and we've just learned so much from her work. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gary, and thanks, Carmel, very much. We're really glad you were able to be here today, and I think your comments put this so much in perspective in terms of how do we connect all these pieces together. And that's a little bit of what I wanted to start with. This paper, More Than Measurement, is about TAP's evaluation system. But of course, as many of you know, since we have been talking about this for a long time, TAP is part of a comprehensive approach for improving teacher and principal effectiveness in schools, and there are other pieces of it, including the career ladder, performance-based compensation, and lots of pieces, but especially the professional development, are very important. And so one of the things we'd like to talk about today is to focus in on the evaluation system, but you'll hear a lot about how it connects to other things. And I think that's where I really heard some interesting things from Carmel today about how they're trying to make these connections at the federal level too, because it is quite difficult to do, to implement comprehensive reform as opposed to trying to change one piece at a time. So what I hope to do this morning is just to quickly run through a few of the findings from the report because it is so long, and give you some of the highlights that we'd like to emphasize, and then to spend most of the time having the panel here describe their experience with TAP's evaluation system, what they've learned, and then to answer questions from the audience. So one of the things we started with when we were looking at this, doing this report, and Craig is going to talk about this quite a bit more as well, we all know that while everyone talks about the importance of great teacher evaluation, it's so important. We need to measure effective teachers. We need to get them into our highest need classrooms. We have such a problem today because these systems, as was illustrated in the widget effect report, are not producing accurate measurement information. And so we can't measure teacher effectiveness in many schools, and that makes it extremely difficult then to make decisions based on that. And so what we're hoping to illustrate for you is all the detail and all the work and all the challenge of moving from that to this. Where you see here a distribution, this is just the classroom observation results in TAP schools. It doesn't include the value-added scores, which we'll talk about as we go forward. But they've been able in TAP schools to create a much more accurate measurement of teacher effectiveness. And you'll see here that the average is actually 3.3, which doesn't show exactly on this chart, but it's a little bit above average because, of course, TAP schools, on average, outperform similar schools, and TAP teachers, on average, outperform other similar teachers with similar students. And so the curve has moved up a little bit, but it does reflect more of an accurate view of the distribution of talent. And I think that's such an important step to accurately measure teacher effectiveness, and then to take from there the important step of moving then to improve. As we start kind of walking through a little bit of the report, I thought I would just very briefly describe the TAP evaluation process and then show you a little bit about what the rubric looks like, because since you'll be hearing the panel talk about it. TAP evaluation uses multiple measures, as Carmel had referenced, to measure teacher effectiveness. So the way we look at it is we use the classroom observation 4 to 6 times a year by multiple trained certified evaluators who are the master, mentor, and principals in the schools. Of course, in a TAP school, you have those master and mentor teachers in place. That represents 50%. The average of those observations represents 50% of a teacher's performance review, and the other half is based on student achievement gains. So for teachers where there is classroom-level value-added data, that would be 30%, and this is described in the report, of their overall performance review. 20% would be based on school-wide growth, measured in terms of value-added. And for teachers without classroom-level value-added data, we use the other 50% is based then on school-wide, and I'm sure there'll be some questions about that. But by using these multiple measures, teachers have multiple opportunities to demonstrate effectiveness. It's not based on a single measure, like a single test score. It's based on value-added growth measures as one piece, but the classroom observation piece is also extremely important. This outlines here the areas that are reviewed during those 4 to 6 evaluations over the course of the year. And you'll hear much more about the training and certification of evaluators, 2 of whom are sitting on this panel, a principal and a master teacher. These are the areas they look at. And the interesting thing about the TAP rubric, I think, from the perspective of those in the audience, this is used as our evaluation rubric, but we also use it to drive professional development. And so there's a direct connection, and we're going to talk a lot more about why we think that's important. Here's just one example of one of the indicators on the rubric. You'll see here, one of the things we've emphasized is to be extremely transparent and very clear and specific about what it is that will result in your score on a particular item in the rubric. This one, in this case, is the element academic feedback. And this is so important because in the past, I think many teachers felt as if evaluations provided them with no useful feedback. They really weren't sure why they got a satisfactory versus a needs improvement. And there were a lot of challenges in terms of using those evaluations to really provide any kind of information to teachers that they could take action. Whereas here, you'll see with this kind of detail, it leads to a very rich conversation around what were you doing in the classroom, what was that resulting in terms of student data and student growth and student activity, and then what might you do differently in the future. The other quick thing to emphasize here is that we recommend in TAP have chosen the scale of 1 to 5, ranging from exemplary being a 5, 3 being proficient teaching, and a 1 being unsatisfactory. We don't list the 2 and the 4 here. We find that range is extremely important to provide stretch, to provide opportunity for every teacher, even the best teacher, can continue to improve. So that this system is not about identifying the few really struggling, failing teachers and finding some way to just deal with those people. This is an evaluation system that provides something for everyone. It helps everyone to improve, and so we get a much better sense of buy-in and participation from teachers, because this is not just about, oh, let's go identify a few teachers who need to improve. It's about how can all of us improve over time. And just to emphasize quickly, I think the other, within the TAP system, the other way that we work on that important element of teacher buy-in is by having a teacher vote before they implement TAP. So we recommend a 75% vote of the faculty. Again, a way to make sure this is done with teachers, that they fully understand what the system does and that they can really benefit from it. Again, just to quickly highlight just a couple of charts from the report, and then the panel can kind of speak to these. We use a data system to take all of the teacher evaluation data and provide ways for leadership teams to use that data and states to use that data to monitor quality control. Carmel had mentioned the importance of quality control. It's really hard to change from a system where everybody's being rated in the top category to one where people really internalize the concept that the middle ranking of a 3 on a scale of 1 to 3 is good, solid teaching. And that's where we want to see, you'll see most people fall, and then you really are seeing 4s and 5s being exemplary, heading toward exemplary teaching, and 1 and 2 would be ineffective teaching, but in a way that you're able to really break out in much more detail, differentiate levels of effectiveness. So how to make sure that that continues? Obviously, you can imagine there could be drift over time. People would start to kind of grade inflate. They'd start to give people higher scores. Or there could be very inconsistent scoring between evaluators. One person's easy, another person's hard. So one of the things that this data system enables schools to do is to take a look at things like inter-rater reliability. So here we've got master teachers who are consistently scoring differently on the evaluation system. Is it because they are scoring different groups of teachers? Maybe master teacher A has higher performing teachers on average versus B. Or maybe master teacher A is essentially an easier grader, and there needs to be a calibration there. So the leadership team at a school consistently looks at these charts and tries to make sure that there is consistency across evaluators, and we're going to hear more from the panel on that. Again, kind of building off what Carmel had noted in the report, it's not just about measuring performance then, but what can you do with that information at the school level? And another use for the evaluation data is to help drive professional development. So this chart, you'll hear more about areas for refinement and reinforcement. This is our language in TAP. An area for refinement is this kind of an area where teachers need to grow. And so this chart shows that in a number of evaluations across this school, certain areas kept coming up as an area where teachers needed to improve. And so the leadership team can look at this and say, wow, lesson structure and pacing is something our teachers are struggling with. Let's be sure to integrate that as we're moving forward to pursue student instructional strategies and make improvements in that area. Lastly, I wanted to show this chart. I think Carmel had also mentioned the issue of validity of measures. We've heard people talking about the importance of multiple measures, but often there's a sense that, well, multiple measures measure multiple things and it doesn't really matter if they correlate. From our perspective, that's really not a good idea. That's the current system we have, where teachers are all told they're great, and yet their student achievement is not where it needs to be. So we need to see a better alignment between how a teacher is scored in their classroom observation and how their students are doing in the classroom. And so this chart shows, I had mentioned that our classroom evaluations are scored on a scale of 1 to 5. You can see that across the bottom. We also translate the student value added scores into a scale of 1 to 5 that you see on the side. And what we look at in schools is a teacher in a TAP school, if they have a higher SKR score, they are on average more likely to have a higher value-added score with their students. And that is really the ultimate goal of this system, is to make sure that we can not only measure performance in classroom observations, that aligns with how students are doing, and then we can use that information to help teachers to improve over time. So I'm going to turn now to the panel. Again, there are many more charts and information in the report. I didn't want to take too much time before jumping into the panel. We've got a distinguished group here today, and I would like to start with the TAP evaluators. I'm going to ask them to briefly describe their school and a little bit about their background as they answer their question. And we've got Monica Hills here, as well as Dedra Collins, and I'm going to turn to them first and then to the other two panelists. So before we go much further, Monica, I wanted to ask you, as a principal in a TAP school, can you compare essentially what evaluation in your school was like prior to TAP, and then some of the changes you've seen in the evaluation structure that you think are most impactful and most important for this audience to consider?
Okay. First, I'll start by giving you a little bit of background about our school. It's Laurie Intermediate School. It's in Donaldsonville, Louisiana, in Ascension Parish. 4 years ago, once I became principal, our school at that point was rated as an academically unacceptable school by our state. We underwent a scholastic audit and then began to kind of research and start looking into the TAP program and even hiring a master teacher and beginning to look at the process. Our school is about 96% African American and 93% free and reduced lunch. Our school district is divided by the Mississippi River, so you will often hear us refer to our East Side or our West Side schools. And historically, our West Side schools have been our lowest performing schools in our district. Because of several measures or reasons. One thing is it was very difficult to recruit and retain teachers that would drive, like we say, drive across the river, across the Mississippi River, in order to come to our West Side schools. So once we began to really take a hard look at some changes that had to occur, because we were at the bottom of the list and we knew that if we did not improve the following year, we would be looking at state takeover, and there was no school in our district that had been taken over by the state and had to have recommendations and reprimands basically because of low performance on statewide assessment. We began to go through our journey as a TAP school and through the TAP process. We began by really working hard with training our teachers and starting off making sure that they understood the instructional rubric in which they were going to be evaluated on. That first year of our TAP implementation, we spent the complete year just on focusing in on the instructional rubric. We did not begin field testing, as you hear us talk about, or looking at strategies or skills. Our basic priority at that time was to change teaching practices that were happening in the classroom and make them more effective. That first year, with just focusing in on the instructional rubric, we grew 8.2 points. The most growth of any other school in our district. Even our highest performing schools were only growing by maybe 2 or 3 baseline points or SPS points. We grew by 8.2 the first year. The second year, we had 11.5, and then the third year, we had 9.5. We were able to really make some changes. We did know that in order to make this program work, that we had to make some changes in our staffing and the programs that we had going on in our school. For instance, when I became principal that first year, I inherited about 5 teachers that were on intensive assistance plans because they had not met the standard on our district-wide observation. Those teachers, we were giving them some feedback. We would go in, but primarily how the protocol was at that time for our district, the teachers were primarily responsible for making sure, making sure that they improve, and they were given the list of things. And our observation tool at that time was more like a checklist of either you did this or sort of kind of did it, or it wasn't observed at all. And so the ratings were satisfactory, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory. So there was not a clear criteria even for us as evaluators to say, hey, well, what does this particular domain on this evaluation form, what does it look and sound like when we should go into the classroom? What should we be looking for? So from there, we began really focusing in on our instructional rubric. And once we began using that evaluation tool, it was so clear-cut for our teachers of what exactly they were going to be looking for, the training process that we went through. We were able to effectively communicate and also have teachers to understand exactly what they were being evaluated on and how we would be able to support them. In addition to that, once we started to follow the TAP protocol and the process for TAP, we were able to build in support systems as far as our leadership team, which consists of the 2 administrators, 4 mentor teachers, and 2 master teachers. And that gave us the support and follow-up that we needed and the people to be able to go into those classrooms and to better assist those teachers and support them. So the evaluation tool, when we did evaluate them and we're going from the pre-conference to the post-conference with them, we're having professional dialogue and conversations with them about what is good instruction and what does it look and sound like, and sitting down with them and not just telling them, well, this didn't meet the standard or you did good here. We're really able to give them some critical feedback and also engage them in very highly reflective dialogue about what good teaching practices look like, and have teachers to be very reflective in their own evaluation as far as the self-evaluation part, because they do get the opportunity to self-evaluate their own lesson that we did observe. So it gives us the opportunity to really get in and to have good, rich dialogue and conversations with teachers and come to a common understanding of what good instruction looks like and give them that feedback. And when there are those areas that for them to be supported in, we have that model built in where we can do the follow-up and the support that they need through weekly cluster meetings, which is our professional development meetings. Also, with the master and the mentor teachers actually going into the classroom and providing a variable different variables of support for them, leading from team teaching to modeling a lesson or just observing and giving them feedback. But the instructional coaching component of the TAP process is what really was able to engage us into having really reflective evaluations and be able to improve teaching and learning in the classrooms.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Really helpful. Dedra, can you speak from the teacher perspective, your experience of evaluation in the past and how evaluation is different now from you're a master teacher now, but of course you're still evaluated. From a teacher perspective, how do you see a change in how that's worked in your school?
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to just begin by telling you a little bit about the school that I'm currently working at. I'm at Rolling Hills Elementary in Lancaster, Texas, which is about maybe 10 minutes outside of Dallas, Texas. The campus that I am on is about 86% African American, a high percentage, about 86, 88% of those students are on free or reduced lunch, and we have a very high mobility rate. So we had, at a point, we had a hard time keeping teachers on our campus. So a big thing was with the TAP system is about the evaluation piece. And what we found from evaluation before TAP, teachers were being observed once a year. A principal came in maybe 40, 45 minutes, gave them feedback on what they did, and that was the end. And so teachers really didn't have the opportunity to get ideas on what they could do better to improve their evaluation. But with the TAP system, we had something totally different. Teachers were able to have true staff development before they were observed. Just like Monica was saying, they had the opportunity to sit in a cluster meeting and find out, okay, what am I being observed on? What will it look like? What does it look like to be effective in this area? So when it came time for the first evaluation, they were more prepared than they were before the TAP system. Another good thing from a teacher's perspective is you weren't just given those areas that you need to improve, you were given suggestions on how you could make those areas better. So for example, if you received a score that wasn't as high on presenting instructional content, then the master teacher, whoever was observing you, would give you about 2 or 3 suggestions on how to improve that the next time. So you're not only being observed one time, but you're being observed a total of 3 to 4 times a year. And all of those scores are averaged together to have an overall score. So it's not just based on one score, but it's based on different people observing at different times. Because as teachers, there are days that are not as good as some days. So it is good to know that you will have an opportunity to be observed more than on that one occasion where it didn't go as well as planned.
Thank you, Dedra. Dennis, let me turn to you now, and if you could talk a little bit about what you've done in South Carolina to try to use the example of TAP to inform what you're doing with your state evaluation, professional development, mentoring, how you're using that to drive state policy and funding decisions.
Okay. In South Carolina, the TAP system is a state TAP system. And what we do is we are actually in the Division of Educator Quality and Leadership, specifically in the Office of Preparation Assessment, Support and Assessment. So when TAP is housed in the same department as our state evaluation system. And in South Carolina, we are unique in the fact that we do have a state evaluation system for all schools and districts across the state. So within that, when TAP came in to South Carolina, what ultimately ended up happening was a joining of the systems. So our system is called the ADEPT system. And our ADEPT system is everything from the mentoring new teachers through the formal evaluation to continuing contract status. So when TAP came into South Carolina, we worked really closely with our state evaluation system to be able to basically meld the two together or blend the two together. So we never say that TAP takes the place of our evaluation system, because we fulfill the requirements of our evaluation system through our ongoing mentoring, through our constant observations and growth. And the unique part is when you look and you hear the idea of teachers get evaluated once a year, once every 3 years, all that. In our TAP schools, every teacher is getting evaluated between 4 to 6 times a year. So this evaluation system becomes an evaluation system of all teachers rather than a punitive system for the lower teachers. And what we hear a lot of through the State Department is that we are allowing all teachers to grow at their rate and being able to give them the support that's necessary. I was actually having a conversation at lunch, and the idea that we've really honed in on the idea that the most effective teaching practice is to differentiate the instruction for students, but yet we don't apply that to our own teachers. So therefore, in the TAP model, a lot of what we do is we really differentiate the need so that we can help all teachers grow at the most effective rate. And with that, being housed at the State Department of Education, it really becomes effective to streamline everything that is happening. TAP is a system that lays into the structure of the school. It is not a system that forces the school to change completely. And what that does is, while you have a lot of other initiatives going on, TAP can streamline this process to be able to allow the professional development and the teacher evaluation system and all of the support that's given from the state as well as through the TAP system to be funneled toward one goal, and that's student achievement. Or teacher efficacy through and ultimately student achievement. So by having the working with the department, we're able to use our technical assistance and work with the standards in our standards division and work with our leadership division and do a lot of different coaching and mentoring and work within those divisions to really streamline the process. And what we've learned is we've learned a lot from each other and been able to help support a lot of the different initiatives in South Carolina. And to give one example of that was mentioned a little earlier is we're now working with the Institutes of Higher Ed. And that in South Carolina, that TAP right now is the only current model using a value-added or a growth analysis. That we've actually we created a project called Project HEAT that is looking at the graduates of institutes of higher ed and looking at their value-added components over or value-added scores over 5 years of removal from the college, and then giving that data back to the colleges to help the colleges of ed then better serve their students to be able to produce graduates. And then we also are linking it with our TAP system to be able to provide some observational data and being able to do that. Now, at this point, there is no punitive measure to that. The whole point is growth and development. And we're trying to do that growth and development starting in the colleges of ed so that as we grow our teachers and they become part of our state system, that system then, they're able to understand what effective pedagogy is, and then the support through all the professional development and all the other state agencies become a streamlined process so that ultimately we're all talking the same language and we're all working toward the same goal, which is student achievement across the board.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess the legislative piece of it is the other piece that I didn't mention. But and we've been asked a few times to work with education subcommittees as well as the Ways and Means Committee at the state level to really start to discuss different aspects of the effectiveness of a growth model and the effectiveness of performance pay, and looking at really multiple things that are being talked about, and how that we can, as a State Department, really help guide these so that because we are showing significant success in doing a model that is different, that they want to talk with us and they want to pick our brains about how it works. So TAP itself is really helping drive a lot of what's happening in South Carolina legislatively as well as in the department.
That's great. That's a perfect segue to what I want to ask Craig. So thank you, Dennis. I want to turn to Craig now, who's kind of our outside expert on the panel and who went down and spent some significant time in Louisiana and has plans to go to more TAP schools and has been talking with a lot of TAP evaluators. And what I'd like Craig to do is to thinking about kind of what you saw when you went down and saw TAP. Obviously, the debate in Washington as well as in many states is how to translate some of this fairly complex and challenging process into policy goals and regulations. And so I'm hoping, Craig, that you can help us to make the connection between what's going on in those TAP schools, what you saw that you felt was different and important to consider at the federal level. I know there's a lot of lessons in here. You could pick any of them, but if you want to kind of start with one or two main points of what really struck you when you went down there and traveled around and saw that.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank NIET publicly because it was just a joy for me to work on a policy project and be able to say, wait, I don't understand something, and for them to say, well, why don't you visit a school and see what it looks like in practice, because it's a rare opportunity to see, you know, the kind of leading edge of innovation and reform that we often talk about here in our meetings in town, to be able to go see real teachers and teacher leaders and principals working on it. And that's, I think, when I returned from my visits to Louisiana, including Monica's school, where I think my jaw dropped on the floor about 5 times. They had to pick it up for me. You know, I emailed Kristan and said, I'd started on a little preliminary outline. I ripped it up and said, start over. You know, I didn't really understand evaluation before I went. And there are about 100 things I could talk about, but I'll just show you through the lens of kind of one issue that we talk about in the report, and that is feedback to teachers, right? So how often do we read all these reports that are coming out now, or hear conversations at the top policy level where we talk about, oh, robust evaluation and measurement of teacher performance, ... and provide teachers feedback, as if that's something simple or automatically that just kind of happens when you adopt a new rubric, or, you know. But if you look in this report, I think the lesson that deals with feedback is the one that we actually give the most pages to, because I realize that all of these things are tremendously complex and nuanced, and the devil is really in the details. I mean, you know, so you can, as a state or as a district, you can say we're doing X, Y, and Z, but it's in really how you do it, how you design it, and how you implement it. So what I realized when I looked at the kind of feedback that takes place in those 45-minute to hour-long conversations between the evaluators and the teacher after the observation is, I mean, the feedback is of a very particular kind. It's kind of honed and designed to really be meaningful and useful to teachers. The entire conversation is highly structured, right? It's not in the form of the evaluator telling the teacher what, you know, the strengths and areas for improvement are, but guided questions, so the teacher ends up thinking about his or her practice hard and analyzing it and discovering it. You know, and that takes a lot of, there's a real art to it and a real skill to it. And something that I didn't even know, even though I'd kind of read the TAP manuals and so forth, is that when evaluators are trained and certified for TAP schools, you know, conducting those post-conferences, providing that kind of feedback is part of what they're trained and certified to do. So they're trained and certified not just how to kind of reliably score those lessons, right, but also how to have post-conferences that give really meaningful, detailed, specific feedback, how to structure those conversations with teachers. And so now whenever I'm in a policy conversation, I hear that, you know, ... and feedback, and then that's the last thing I hear about it, and it all goes back to kind of the measurement. I think, oh, it's so much more complex than that. You know, policymakers need to understand it, because it requires real effort and investment to get that stuff right, and getting that stuff right is where we're going to really grow teacher effectiveness.
Thanks. Well, we have a lot more to say about the report, but I want to open up and give an opportunity for questions from the audience, and then you know, create more of just a conversation amongst the panelists. So let me turn now and see if anyone in the audience has any questions they want to jump in with now, or otherwise we'll keep going with our conversation. All right. Good. Well, one of the issues that's come up. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Hi, my name's Ellen Fernan. I was just wondering, maybe if someone could talk about, you talked about the importance of a 75% vote of the teachers before TAP comes in. I was wondering if maybe one of the panelists could talk about, was that difficult in your school, or what education needs to go in before that vote, or something about that? Thank you.
Absolutely. Do you want to take that one, Monica?
Okay. Before the vote, what we did go to a couple of meetings in which we got an overview of what TAP was. We did also get the opportunity through our state director, who set it up, for us to go and take groups of teachers to visit other TAP schools that were already in progress, to kind of get some information about TAP before proceeding with the vote. After that, we did take a vote, and 90% of the teachers did vote to go forward with TAP. Once we got embedded, and I was sharing this with with Kristan earlier, once we really got embedded and about 6 weeks into having our cluster meetings, some of my veteran teachers, after having to go through this process and really having to be transparent and be reflective and lay it on the table, you know, it's not all about what the kids didn't do, but what did I not do, or what could I have done better to make this lesson better? A group of them approached me and they wanted a meeting, and I met with them, and they said, when is all this cluster stuff going away? When is this TAP stuff going away? The same people who voted for it. And at that time, we were under scholastic audit, academic, you know, academically unacceptable. And I said, when the score gets to 120, then we can talk about it. And at that time, it was like 52, and I'm thinking in my mind, that's not about to happen right away, so I have some time. But initially, you know, we talk about all the success that we have now, but it was just being consistent and putting it to the forefront of the teachers that this is going to grow you. And one of the things that was hard for them is because so often we have programs to come in and go away. We have presenters to come, things to come. And once they leave, we really don't know, are we doing this correctly? Are we implementing this strategy? We could talk all day about Marzanos, but, you know, are we going to have him come and tell us if we're doing this correct? So we, that was one of the biggest things and the biggest changes for them. And once we establish that we're building capacity in our teachers on campus to become teacher leaders, to be our experts on our campus, and, you know, get them going with being highly reflective, then we were able to really proceed with the process of, you know, full implementation of TAP. But initially, you know, those were some concerns, and they wanted to know, you know, they thought just like with anything else, it was going to come and go away. And after us being so consistent and firm and the implementation being at the highest fidelity, then they began, and once they saw the growth and the changes that were happening in the classroom, then they began to really accept what we were doing and really wholeheartedly buy into our journey through the TAP process.
Hello, my name is Bagoy Jagona. I'm with Education Daily. I have 2 questions. First, I want to know what kind of questions teachers are asking you. You said you spent a year working through the rubric. What kind of questions do teachers commonly ask about, you know, instructional practices? And then the other question is for Dennis. You said that your evaluation system is statewide, and I'm wondering how that would compare to other places where it's district per district deciding what goes on in their evaluation system, and what kind of technical assistance you think would fit that situation as opposed to yours.
Let me have Dedra answer the first question about what kind of response she gets from teachers.
Well, when we first introduced TAP to our campus, a lot of the teachers were very standoffish because they felt like it was an I got you thing. You're coming in my classroom to see what I'm not doing. You're not coming in to see the good things that I'm doing. So a lot of teachers were totally against it when they first got involved in it and started going to cluster meetings. And then they realized we're not trying to catch you doing something bad. We're actually trying to help you build the capacity to teach kids in an effective manner. So that was one thing. Another thing that a huge conversation arose from, so when we get our scores, what do we do then? And then when we have the conversations about after you get your scores, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about these are the things that you can do to make it better, then a lot of the fear that the teachers had ceased. And we still have a few teachers that, you know, that are new to the campus that are still having those same questions, but we still have the same things in place. We have teachers that are really supporting TAP now, so it's not an issue, the same issue that we had when we first started. So I hope that answered your question.
And to kind of piggyback off her before I get to mine, a lot of times value added is a very big question. Teachers want to know specifically how they're going to be measured as it relates to student achievement. Typically in education, we measure by attainment level of you have highly successful students or your students weren't as successful as it relates to a benchmark. So therefore, isn't it unfair that because she has the gifted students, she's going to be the best, and she doesn't have the gifted students, so she's not going to be. So really breaking through those barriers and help understand the difference between a value-added growth model rather than an attainment model is I think, one of the biggest questions that I field from the state level from most teachers. And that's tends to be what I do is to go through and really talk about, to answer the question that was in the back, of really help teachers understand the transparency of what everything is so that they can go in open eyes rather than, and understanding the change curve rather than just going into that process. As far as the going down to a district level, I think when you look at a district level compared to a state level, I think the dynamics are still the same. You're going to have an evaluation system that's designed for your district level. So within the process, it would be going through working with the leaders within the district as well as the school board and teacher unions and affiliations to really help understand what the evaluation process is going to look like, how it's going to fulfill what are the requirements of your evaluation system within the district, and then create from there a guidance system. There are two really kind of different process to this. If the district adopts TAP holistically, so all schools in the district use the TAP model, it becomes your evaluation system for the district. It is certainly rigorous enough that it will meet the needs of all teachers in all different areas, because the rubric is designed such that it can be used for 3K up to high school physics. So therefore it is adaptable to all different areas. So with that, then it becomes, policymakers at the district level really work together to identify exactly how that's going to look. That's exactly what we did at the state level. What we did is we brought together all of the teachers of the year in our teacher forum and our Milken educators and all rewards. And then from there, we brought together all of the evaluation components, the longitudinal data systems, the deputy superintendents, the superintendent, and really had open conversation of what is this going to look like. So how does this fit the needs of what is our requirement of evaluation, and then how does it fit the needs of our mentoring program, of our growth and our continuing contract status, and basically fold everything into that process. So I think it would be very similar to what we did at the state, just a smaller aspect with different personnel involved.
Other questions? Yeah, right here.
Hi, my name is Melissa Wu. I'm with the New Teacher Project. I wanted to hear a bit more about student outcomes, particularly in non-tested grades and subjects, and was curious to hear what has been, how you ensure the validity and correlation of measures of teacher effectiveness in non-tested grades and subjects, and what the most promising measures are and what teachers' reactions are to those.
I'm wondering who to pass that one to. Let me make sure I understand your question. So in terms of, in all TAP schools, all teachers get the classroom observations, and then in TAP schools, if you have individual level classroom value-added data, that's a part of your performance, and otherwise you use school level.
And how to, beyond the school level, how to check the validity at the classroom level? What are the promising measures, if there aren't any yet, and what are teachers' reactions?
It's interesting. I don't know if others on the panel have a response to that. I think within TAP, I think we can talk mainly about the measures we're currently using. I think in the high school setting, we can talk about some of the other measures being used in high school settings where there aren't as many tests, there are a lot more untested grades and subjects where we're looking to use other measures of success. And Dennis, maybe you want to take that and talk a little bit about, or Monica as well, about the high school, and that addresses some of the untested subjects. Of course, we're moving now to a situation where there are more and more tests in other grades that we're able to use, but can you speak to that?
Specifically in high school in South Carolina, we have an accountability report card that high schools receive with the HSAP, which all 10th graders take and must pass before they graduate. So what we do is we create a growth model using end of course tests, HSAP, longitudinal passage of HSAP, graduation rate, and longitudinal passage of longitudinal graduation rate. And then what we do is we compile that into, we have schools like ours that work together, and then we look at consistent growth rates over time and basically create a value-added analysis using those key factors as the 50% of the student growth rate as it relates to that piece of the evaluation. One of the things that we've talked about a lot is the idea of, at what point in time is testing too much? To where, I think I heard the stat that you'd have to create 670 tests to be able to use a value-added analysis on every teacher. And I think once you get to that, are we getting away from what we would truly do, which is teaching? So the high schools, we've worked together. We have a cohort of high schools and new high schools coming on this year that are truly working together as a advisory panel to really talk about the effects of student growth. And what we've done is we've done some analysis with some end-of-course tests, but even predictors, similar to, if the last test they take is in 8th grade and you take Algebra 2 end-of-course test in 10th grade, is that 8th grade test enough of a predictor pretest to be able to do that? And right now we have not been able to make a validation of being able to use those models. So we've stayed away from that. And the high school teachers have really kind of helped design that. They were on our advisory committee to help design that process. The other thing that we do in South Carolina as it relates to our specials or our related arts teachers in elementary, middle, or elementary or middle school is that we never want them to stop teaching their core subject. But there are times that they have the opportunity to connect to other students. So for example, if you're a 4th grade art teacher and in your art curriculum you're teaching a lot of geometric figures, you can help the 4th grade math students with geometry, so therefore you could choose as a teacher to link to those 4th grade math students that you're teaching, so therefore you would have a growth score based on those students, not particularly in art, but in math, in the area of math. Now that is entirely a teacher and school decision. That is never forced or mandated on anyone. And we have about 15% of our related arts teachers who choose to do that. Otherwise, they do fall into the overall category because, as we know, art and music and band and every other kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade are vital to the overall effect of the school. So therefore, they become more evaluated on the overall school growth. And I have not seen or heard any significant comeback on any of that is because they were involved in it. They know it from the beginning. They ask their questions, and really that transparency and discussion is really what helps them understand exactly where they are.
Maybe just like one quick other additional observation to that, really interesting, and that is that there's a real virtue in using a common instructional framework or evaluation rubric, whatever you want to call it. It plays different roles in professional development and evaluation, but in the TAP system, because what they've done is for the grades and subjects where you do have the student achievement gain data, the value-added data or whatever, both as they were developing the rubric, they did validation studies where they showed that teachers who tended to get higher SKR scores, as Kristan showed, you tended to get higher value-added scores, and then over time they've monitored that across the whole system, right? And so what you've done is you've shown for the grades and subjects where you do have the outcome data that those inputs matter, right? And so for an art teacher or something, it's not as if the SKR scores, the professional practice observations are meaningless because they don't have the other data. What you do is you say, it's the same set of practices that, that if we did have tests in these subjects, we would expect to see, high student learning gains for these teachers. So it doesn't feel like a gap in practice, right? If you talk to teachers in TAP schools, it feels very organic, right? And there's not a sense of, you have these measures and I have these measures. So again, and that's just the value of looking at it in terms of how these policies get enacted in real schools with real teachers.
Thank you. I had one quick thing to add on that, but I don't want to preempt if anyone else has another question. Yes?
I have a related question to piggyback off for her. How, in instances where you have co-teaching, where you have special educators in the classroom, how do you factor in the value of the special educator as far as evaluation, their contribution to their overall learning?
Let me turn that to Monica.
One thing that we do when we're designing our schedule for our clusters throughout the year, we make sure that special education teacher, that inclusion teacher, is connected or in a cluster group with the teacher that they serve. For example, my 5th grade math teacher and my 5th grade inclusion teacher are together. They're looking at the student work together. So these are the same students that they are teaching and they share. And they share that data to see how they're improving overall and their effectiveness. Now, as far as the model in which they're graded on, as far as the evaluation system, they're on the 50-50 model. And however, they are linked to the students, and they are working directly with the teacher that they service and the students that they service in those classrooms, and that's at every grade level. And they are also observed, their follow-up, their support, the whole process for TAP happens within that classroom in which they're working with that grade level teacher. So they're able to look at that data. Now, when we're getting to our reporting system, just how our student information system is set up, it won't report out specifically to that teacher because there can only be one teacher in the system linked to those students. However, we share that data with that special education teacher so she'll know exactly how the students are performing in that classroom. Now, one thing that we are, as far as our state, we have a state value-added model in which we just recently got data on in December, and it does take into the variables of who's identified as special education students. So that kind of helps us with a little bit more data, but that's just one additional piece. But the real work with looking at that data is sharing those linkages with the special education teacher and the regular ed teacher, and then also that real work that happens in cluster when they're looking at actual student work and student responses to see how they are growing students, and then how, as the inclusion teacher, as their role and their job and the services that they need to specifically provide to those kids that they're assigned to.
All right. Yeah, and I think in response to team teaching, the value-added system does enable teachers who share students to both be associated with that data. So I think there are a lot of ways that works. We can talk in more detail afterward if that's helpful to you.
Kristan, I think we've explained several ways we bend our model to deal with those non-tested grades. But the matter of fact is, until we have a valid and reliable measure for those non-tested grades, we are using other metrics in terms of the accountability system. But TAP as a structure will be primed and ready for when we do have the opportunity to add additional measures in those non-tested grades. And that at some point they maybe will be tested, but they're not yet. But I think we've done a good job we've done a good job to add multiple measures in the absence of a measure or a metric. And one of the more prevalent places would be a high school, where we're really limited in terms of the content measurements, when you only have 20%, maybe 15% of the staff that would be involved in having a value-added score. So we've had to look at other measures to keep that staff, to not have them be disenfranchised with what's happening in terms of the accountability system. And we look at other performance matrices that would take into account those indicators or criteria that would be valuable to a high school staff, whether that would be graduation rates, end-of-course tests, AP completions, the different variables at the high school that make these indicators more relevant. But hopefully soon the technology of non-tested grades will catch up to where we're going.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Let me just quickly add one thing to that. This morning we were doing a briefing with some congressional staff, and they had some questions about Common Core, about common standards and assessments, and kind of referencing what Gary was just talking about. So, one of the things we talked about is that because of this structure where you've got master and mentor teachers who work with designated groups of teachers in professional development clusters and who evaluate those teachers, those structures are very helpful so that when you have new standards and new assessments, you've got a structure in place in that school to get those down into the classroom level, to get them implemented with fidelity. And so that's one of the areas we're hoping to work more with our leadership teams and our state directors, to share some of the information about what they've started to do and some of the structures they have in place that we hope will help add to the conversation around how to actually get the common standards and assessments working down at the classroom level as they come online. Other questions from the audience or comments? All right, well, thank you all very much for coming today. I want to thank our panelists and to thank Gary and, of course, Carmel Martin for opening it up for us. And we look forward to an ongoing dialogue as you read through the report and have more questions. Thank you.